I never thought the day would come when my own daughter would look me in the eye and decide I was no longer worth taking home. But when she left me standing alone at that airport with nothing but a one-way ticket and the memory of everything I'd given her, I knew something in me had to break, so something stronger could finally grow in its place. If you believe no one has the right to decide your worth, or if you've ever felt abandoned by the people you loved most, then don't scroll away. Subscribe now to hear the rest of my story, leave a comment to share yours, and send this video to someone who needs to know they are never truly alone. I didn't know if I had lost my husband or my entire family that winter. At 68, freshly widowed, I stepped out of the church after Jake's funeral, feeling a coldness that went beyond the weather. The man I'd shared 45 years with was gone. But what hit me harder was the silence around me, the absence of the family I thought I had. In that moment, I wasn't sure if I was mourning a husband or a life that was already unraveling. I didn't have time to decide whether I was ready to keep living alone in that quiet house. Barely a week after the funeral, Emma showed up on my porch with Kyle standing behind her, both of them trying too hard to look sympathetic. She didn't even knock, just let herself in like she still lived there. My heart thumped at the sight of her, some fragile part of me, hoping she'd come just to sit with me, to let me grieve without hurrying me along. But the way she glanced around the living room like she was already counting what might be given away made my chest tighten. "Mom," she said, voice soft, but edged with something I couldn't quite name, "you can't keep sitting here alone. It's not healthy. You've been crying every day." Of course I'd been crying. My husband had been gone less than 2 weeks. But I didn't say that. I just nodded because after so many years of putting my family first, it felt easier to agree than to argue. Kyle spoke up next, shifting from foot to foot like he was in a hurry to be anywhere else. "Emma and I have been thinking. We're planning to take the kids to California for a few weeks. Get some sun fresh air. You should come with us." I looked up at them, too stunned to answer right away. "A trip. Now." My eyes flicked to the framed photo of Jake on the mantel, the one where he was grinning in his old baseball cap. He'd hated California, said the beaches were too crowded. I felt a pang in my chest just thinking about it. Emma must have noticed my hesitation because she came closer and took my hand. Her palm felt cool, her fingers steady. For a second I wanted to believe she really did care. "Mom," she whispered, squeezing gently, "I promise it'll help. You'll feel lighter. We don't want to see you like this." Her eyes held mine, and in that moment, something in me cracked. I was tired of being alone in the dark, tired of waking up to a bed that felt too big and a house that felt like a mausoleum. Maybe she was right. Maybe it would help to get away. Maybe for a little while I could pretend I was still part of something. I swallowed hard. "All right," I heard myself say. "If you really think it will help." Emma's face brightened, instantly relief flooding her expression. "Good. It's settled then. We'll book the tickets this week." She let go of my hand and looked back at Kyle, who gave a curt nod like he'd just signed off on a business deal. I didn't know why that bothered me so much, maybe because it felt rehearsed like they'd practiced this speech in the car. But I shook the thought away. I needed to hold on to the hope that this was about love, not obligation. Later that evening, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at the envelope where I kept my small savings money Jake and I had set aside for emergencies. My hands trembled as I counted out the bills. When Emma said everyone would contribute, I knew what she meant. She wanted me to pay my share, maybe more. I tried not to let that hurt me. I told myself it was fair. We'd all chip in like a family should. But deep down, I felt a flicker of shame, like I was buying my place in their lives. Still, I folded the money into a fresh envelope and tucked it into my purse. I told myself this was a choice, that I was doing something brave, that it meant they still wanted me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the gutters. I remembered the first trip Jake and I ever took, just the two of us in a beat-up station wagon driving across Arizona. He'd held my hand the whole way like he couldn't imagine going anywhere without me. It struck me that no one had held my hand since. Not really. When dawn broke, I packed my suitcase carefully. I laid out my nicest blouse, the soft blue one Jake said brought out my eyes. I folded the photo of him and slipped it between two sweaters, a private promise that I wouldn't leave him behind no matter where I was going. My chest felt tight, but it was the first time in weeks that I'd felt something other than grief. A trip to California? A chance to be included again. A reason to believe I hadn't become invisible. I wanted so badly to believe Emma meant every word when she said I'd feel lighter, that this was for me, not for them. Even if a small voice inside me kept whispering that hope could be a dangerous thing. I woke up before dawn the morning of the flight, my heart beating so fast it made my hands shake. I kept telling myself this was good. This was what family did. They showed up, they helped you stand back up. But the closer we got to the airport, the more my stomach twisted, as if some part of me already knew this day would be the line between who I'd been and who I'd have to become. Emma was all smiles as she pulled up to the curb. She didn't get out of the car. She just popped the trunk and waited while I lifted my suitcase in by myself. Kyle was in the passenger seat, sunglasses on before the sun was even up. Neither of them asked if I'd slept or if I was ready. They just told me to hurry so we wouldn't miss boarding. Inside the terminal, everything moved too fast. The lines snaked in every direction, people talking over each other, babies crying, announcements booming overhead. I tried to stay close behind them as we made our way to the check-in counter. Emma breezed up first, smiling sweetly at the attendant as she handed over her passport. Kyle did the same. When it was my turn, I placed my ticket and ID on the counter, forcing a polite smile, even though my throat felt tight. The woman behind the desk scanned the barcode, frowned, and looked up at me. "Ma'am, I'm sorry this ticket only shows a one-way flight." I blinked, not understanding. "I don't think that's right," I said quickly. "It's a round trip. We're traveling together." She tapped her keyboard, trying again. Emma and Kyle stood a few feet away, pretending to scroll through their phones. "I'm not seeing a return booking under your name," the attendant said, lowering her voice a little. "You'd need to purchase a separate ticket back." My cheeks burned as I turned to Emma, holding up the boarding pass like it was evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to. "Emma, is this some kind of mistake?" She didn't meet my eyes. She just sighed like she was tired of this already. "Mom, we thought you'd want a little more time in California. You've got your Social Security, your phone. You can figure out when you want to come back. Figure it out." My voice cracked too loud in that crowded terminal. Kyle stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "We've got the kids and work when we get back." "We can't hold your hand every step of the way," he muttered. I looked at both of them, searching for any sign of the people who had promised me this was about healing, about family. But all I saw was impatience and a relief that they wouldn't have to be responsible for me once we landed. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything warm and left nothing but cold air. Emma reached for her suitcase handle and finally looked at me, her expression flat. "We can't do everything for you, Mom. We've got our own lives." She didn't hug me. She didn't say it would be okay. She just turned around and started walking toward the security line. Kyle followed without a word. I took a shaky step after them, feeling panic bloom in my throat. "Wait, my bag. What about my luggage?" Emma didn't even look back. "We checked it with ours. You can get it later if you need it." And then they were gone, just like that. I stood there with nothing but my purse and a one-way ticket to a place I suddenly didn't want to go. People flowed around me, annoyed that I was in their way. The woman at the counter gave me a pitying look. "Would you like help booking a return?" she asked softly. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. I could feel tears stinging behind my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break here in the middle of the terminal. Somewhere overhead, an announcement blared that boarding had begun for our flight. My flight, I corrected myself bitterly. Mine, alone. I turned to watch the security line. I caught a glimpse of Emma's blonde hair as she disappeared behind the metal detectors, Kyle right beside her. Neither of them looked back. That was the moment I knew. Whatever illusion I'd been clinging to that I still mattered to them, that I was still needed, was gone. I was nothing but an obligation they couldn't wait to shrug off. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, but underneath the hurt was something else, something harder. A thin, sharp anger that felt dangerously close to clarity. I don't know how long I stood there in the middle of San Diego International Airport. Time turned slippery minutes sliding past without shape. People hurried around me, families with kids bouncing on rolling suitcases, businessmen shouting into phones, couples hand in hand. None of them noticed the old woman rooted in place like she'd forgotten where she was supposed to go. Maybe I had. My ticket crumpled in my hand. My heart thudded so loud I was sure everyone could hear it, but no one even looked twice. I was invisible until a young man in a Padres cap slowed as he passed. He glanced at me, his brow creasing. "Ma'am, do you need some help?" The question was simple kind, but it scraped something raw in me, because for the first time, I truly understood I did need help. And the two people who should have been here to give it my own daughter and the man she married had decided I was too much trouble to bother with. I couldn't make my mouth work to answer him, my throat locked up. All I could do was shake my head, gripping my purse tight against my chest, like it was the last thing tethering me to any kind of dignity. He hesitated clearly, unsure if he should walk away. I wished he would. His sympathy felt like salt in a wound I was trying desperately to keep from splitting open right there on the polished airport floor. After a moment, he nodded and moved on, disappearing into the river of travelers who had somewhere to be, someone waiting for them. I had no one. I tried to swallow the shame, but it lodged in my chest like a stone. My legs felt weak. I stumbled to a bench along the wall and sank down before they gave out completely. The cold metal pressed into my back, sharp and unyielding, a reminder that there would be no softness waiting for me in this place. Some part of me kept replaying the last 10 minutes in an endless loop. The look on Emma's face when she told me to figure it out. Kyle turning away without even saying goodbye. The way their bodies blended into the crowd as easily as if they'd never known me. I kept thinking there had to be a mistake. That any second Emma would come running back, apologizing, promising she didn't mean it. But nobody came back. I looked down at the boarding pass in my fist. One way, no return. That was all I was worth to them, a ticket to be left behind, a burden they didn't want to carry. Tears blurred the letters on the paper, but I blinked them away. I refused to let myself sob. Not here. Not for them. If they were going to discard me like old luggage, the least I could do was keep the last scraps of my pride intact. I thought about Jake, about the nights he would pull me in close and promise I'd never be alone. The grief in my chest twisted into something sharper, something closer to rage, because he'd kept his promise as long as he could, and the moment he was gone, the people we'd raised together decided I was optional. I pressed a hand over my heart and felt it still beating under my palm. No matter how hollow I felt, I was still alive. Still here. Somewhere in the distance, the overhead speakers crackled to life, announcing final boarding for my flight. My flight. No one waiting for me on the other end. No suitcase, no plan. But I wasn't going to sit here forever. I wasn't going to let them have the last word. I took a shaky breath, wiped my eyes with the edge of my sleeve, and reached for my phone. Because if Emma and Kyle thought abandoning me meant I'd vanish quietly, they didn't know me at all. I sat on that cold bench a long time, my pulse finally slowing from the storm that had cracked my heart wide open. My hand kept drifting to the empty space where my suitcase should have been. It felt like the perfect metaphor they'd taken everything that belonged to me, my trust, my hope, my place in their lives, and rolled it right through security without a second glance. I looked down at my phone in my lap. For a moment, I thought about calling Emma. Maybe she'd answer. Maybe she'd soften. But even imagining her voice made my stomach twist. I'd spent too many years excusing their carelessness, telling myself it was just the stress of modern life that I was expecting too much. But this wasn't forgetfulness. This was a decision. My thumb hovered over her contact, then moved away. If I was going to make a call, it wouldn't be to beg. It would be to reclaim something they'd never touch again. I scrolled past the names of old friends I hadn't spoken to in months past, the neighbors who brought casseroles after Jake died, past the family numbers that suddenly felt like strangers. My thumb stopped on one name, Mr. Dawson. He'd been Jake's attorney for over 20 years. He'd handled our will when we were still young enough to believe we had forever. I remembered Jake telling me, half laughing as he signed the papers, "If you ever need help, Dawson is the man." Back then, it felt like insurance against something impossible. Today, it felt like the only steady ground I had left. I swallowed hard and pressed the call button. My hand was trembling, but my voice, when I finally heard it in my ear, came out clear. Mrs. Monroe Dawson answered, sounding cautious, like he already knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. "It's Eleanor," I said, my throat tightening for just a second. "I need to update my will." There was a pause, the kind that stretches on forever when you're about to cross a line you can't uncross. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "This isn't something to do in a moment of upset." I stared straight ahead at the streams of travelers hurrying past. No one noticed the old woman deciding she was done being disposable. My fingers gripped the phone tighter. I've never been more sure, I told him. And it was true. For the first time since Jake died, I wasn't just reacting to heartbreak. I was choosing something. "Very well," Dawson said, his tone shifting from caution to quiet respect. "We can meet today if you'd like." I exhaled, feeling the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. "Today," I said, "as soon as possible." He gave me the address of his office downtown. I scribbled it on the back of my crumpled boarding pass, pressing the pen so hard the paper nearly tore. When I hung up, I sat very still. The PA system was calling for final boarding of my flight to nowhere, a one-way trip they'd designed to get me out of sight. I stood up slowly, pressing my palm over my heart to steady the pounding there. Let them take their vacation photos and pretend I was simply too fragile to keep up. Let them spin their stories later about how I'd misunderstood, how I was overreacting. But I knew exactly what this was. It was abandonment, neatly packaged, and handed to me like a gift I was supposed to thank them for. I walked past the security line, where I'd last seen them disappear without a backward glance. My shoes tapped the tile in a steady rhythm, each step louder in my own ears. Not hesitant, not afraid. Outside, the air felt different, sharp and bright and honest, in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I flagged down a cab, gave the driver Dawson's address, and closed the door behind me like I was closing a chapter. They thought they'd left me with nothing, but they were wrong. I still had my name, my voice, and every right to decide what happened to what Jake and I had built. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I took one last look at the terminal, disappearing behind me. For a moment, I thought I might cry again, but no tears came. Only a steady, fierce determination I hadn't known I still possessed. They thought I'd crumble. Instead, I was about to write them out of my life with the same calm finality they'd shown me when they walked away. The cab ride felt longer than it probably was. Every stoplight, every passing mile marker out the window seemed to echo the same thought over and over. You are not going back. For years, I'd told myself I was too old to start over, too worn down to stand up for myself. But by the time the cab pulled up in front of Dawson's brick building, that old voice had gone quiet. All I could feel was a fierce, steady certainty. I paid the driver with the last cash I had in my purse. My hand didn't even shake when I counted out the bills. I climbed the front steps, feeling the weight of what I was about to do settle across my shoulders, not like a burden, but like armor. The receptionist looked surprised when I walked in without an appointment. "Mrs. Monroe," she asked, blinking behind her glasses. "I'm here to see Mr. Dawson," I said. My voice was calm, stronger than I expected. "He's expecting me." She nodded quickly, motioning me toward the hall. The office door was already cracked open, as if Dawson knew I wouldn't wait in the lobby. He stood when I stepped inside, older than I remembered, hair more silver than gray, but his eyes were exactly the same, steady and kind. "Eleanor," he said, offering his hand, "I'm very sorry about Jake." I shook his hand and sat down across from him, unbuttoning my old wool coat and laying it carefully over the arm of the chair. For a moment, I looked at the coat's frayed edges and thought about how long I'd been wearing it, how many winters it had seen. Then I lifted my chin and met his gaze. "I'm not here to talk about the funeral," I said, my voice level. "I'm here because I need to make changes. Big ones." He nodded slowly, folding his hands over the open folder in front of him. "Tell me what you'd like to do." I didn't hesitate. "I want Emma and Kyle removed from every part of my will, every account, every deed, every right." He didn't look shocked, just solemn. "Eleanor, that's not something to take lightly. Once we file this, it's permanent unless you change it again." "I understand." I kept my eyes on his. And I've never been more certain of anything. For years, I'd believed Emma's sighs and excuses were harmless. that her distance was just her way of coping with her own life. But standing alone in that airport, I'd finally seen it for what it was: contempt. The kind that grows so slowly you stop noticing the poison. I also want to set up a charitable trust. I continued my pulse steady. There's an organization, Harbor Women's Fund. They help older women who've been financially exploited or abandoned. Dawson raised his eyebrows, not in judgment, but in something like respect. "I know them," he said. "It's a good group. Then I want them to have everything." My voice didn't waver. The house, the savings, my pension. I want it all transferred to them upon my passing. He picked up his pen, flipped to a blank page, and began writing. The scratch of his pen was the only sound in the room, but I felt like I could finally breathe. When he looked up, I nodded. "Let's do it today." He studied me for a long moment. "I need you to sign some documents," he said gently. "I'll witness them myself. And when we're finished, no one will be able to undo it without your consent. That's exactly what I want." He pulled the stack of papers from a drawer and laid them between us. I read every line, every clause, every stipulation. My eyes didn't blur with tears this time. My hands didn't shake when I picked up the pen. One by one, I signed each page. The final signature felt heavier, like I was sealing something shut forever. But it wasn't grief that settled in my chest when I set the pen down. It was relief. Dawson slid the papers into a thick envelope, his expression thoughtful. "I hope this brings you peace." I looked him straight in the eye. "It already has." As I stood, I felt taller than I had in years. I slipped my old coat over my shoulders and buttoned it up to my collarbone. The fabric was still worn, but it felt different now, like it belonged to a woman who finally understood her worth. No more apologies, no more begging for a place in someone else's life. This was mine. Every last decision, every final word. I left Dawson's office with the signed documents pressed flat inside a manila envelope, the ink still fresh and final. When the door closed behind me, it was as if the last thread tying me to Emma and Kyle had snapped clean in two. I didn't feel regret, not even a flicker, just a quiet certainty that I had finally chosen myself. Outside, the afternoon had faded into an early winter dusk. The wind coming off the ocean was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but I welcomed it. I needed something real, something that reminded me I was still here, still capable of feeling more than grief. I walked 2 blocks to a narrow motel that faced the water. The neon sign flickered, "Vacancy." I paid for 1 night with the emergency cash I kept hidden in the lining of my purse money Jake always insisted I carry. The clerk didn't ask questions. He just slid the key across the counter and wished me a good evening. Room 12 was nothing special. 2 double beds with scratchy comforters, a television bolted to the dresser. But the moment I shut the door, a calm I hadn't known in months settled over me. For the first time in years, no one knew exactly where I was. No one could tell me what I should feel or who I should be. I set my coat on the back of the chair and stood by the window. Outside, the ocean spread out in a dark, endless sweep. The waves were black against the faint glow of the horizon, rolling in steady and unbothered. I pressed my hand to the glass and watched the water until my heartbeat slowed. In the quiet, my thoughts finally stopped racing. All day, I'd been carrying the memory of Emma's face as she turned away, Kyle's voice when he said they couldn't hold my hand anymore. That moment in the airport replayed so many times I thought it would drive me mad. But standing there in that plain motel room, I realized something I hadn't let myself see before. They didn't leave because they were overwhelmed. They left because they believed I would never do anything about it. I closed my eyes and let that truth settle in my chest. It didn't feel like defeat. It felt like clarity. I sat on the edge of the bed, the documents still in my lap, and traced my name on the envelope. My hand was steady. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my hurt, all the holidays I'd spent pretending their dismissiveness didn't matter, all the times I'd told myself that love meant forgiving everything. Not anymore. I had spent nearly 7 decades building a life, building a family, believing that loyalty was a debt I owed no matter how it was repaid. But tonight in this room, no one had chosen for me. I understood something simple and absolute. They had lost the right to call me theirs. My chest didn't ache when I thought it. My throat didn't close. If anything, it felt like taking a first clean breath after years of stale air. I pulled back the thin curtain and opened the window a few inches. The salt air poured in sharp and cold. I let it wash over me. Somewhere along the shore, a gull cried into the dark. I imagined Jake sitting beside me, his hand resting over mine like he used to do whenever life felt too heavy. I could almost hear him say, "It's about time you remembered who you are." I didn't cry that night. For the first time since the funeral, my eyes stayed dry. I lay back against the pillow listening to the waves. They kept coming, relentless and patient, smoothing everything in their path. I let that sound be the only thing I held on to as I closed my eyes. When I whispered into the darkness, my voice was steady. "They've lost the right to call me family." And with those words, I finally felt free. The morning I checked out of the motel, the ocean looked softer in the daylight, like it was giving me permission to go. I didn't rush. I folded my clothes with care, placed the signed documents in the front pocket of my suitcase, and took one last look at the room that had held my first night of peace in longer than I could remember. The cab ride to Riverside Haven was quiet, just the hum of the engine and the rhythm of my breathing. As we turned off the highway, I felt something I hadn't expected, a flicker of nervousness. But it wasn't dread. It was the unsettled hope that maybe I was about to find someplace I belonged again. The entrance was simple, a low brick building with a white sign that read Riverside Haven Independent Living. Two women were tending a flower bed out front, their laughter rising over the clink of garden tools. The driver helped me with my suitcase, and I tipped him more than I should have because I wanted to thank him for bringing me here without asking a single question. Inside the lobby smelled like fresh coffee and lemon polish, clean without being sterile. A woman at the desk looked up and smiled. Not the thin, distracted smile I'd gotten used to, but something genuine. She came around the counter and extended her hand. "Mrs. Monroe." "We've been expecting you," she said, her voice warm enough to melt the last edge of my uncertainty. "I'm Dinah, the community director. Let me show you to your apartment." She didn't treat me like a burden. She didn't glance at my age and sigh. She walked beside me like I was someone worth knowing. When she opened the door to my new unit, I stepped inside and felt my throat tighten, not from sadness, but relief. The space was bright with wide windows that looked out on a courtyard where a few residents were having morning coffee. There was a small kitchenette, a pale blue armchair, and a bookshelf, already waiting for the things I'd saved from my old life. "This is your home now," Dana said softly. "Take your time settling in. If you need anything, just press that call button." After she left, I set my suitcase by the bed and moved to the window. The grass was damp with dew, but a little sparrow was hopping between the chairs like he owned the place. I watched him for a moment and felt something loosen in my chest. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph I'd brought with me from the motel. Jake, laughing with his head thrown back, the sun catching the lines on his face. I held it against my heart and whispered, "You'd like it here." On the table near the window, I placed the frame where the light could find it. Then I took out a small piece of stationery, the same pale cream color Jake always liked, and wrote in careful script, "I'm still here." I taped the note to the bottom edge of the frame. It wasn't for anyone else to read, just me, a reminder that no matter how much had been taken from me, this was a beginning I'd claimed with my own hands. I unpacked slowly. Each drawer I filled felt like staking a flag in new territory. My softest cardigan went into the closet. The jar of peppermint candies Jake used to tease me about found a place on the nightstand. When I hung my coat, the same one I'd worn through every hard day, I realized it no longer looked like a symbol of survival. It just looked like a coat. A knock came at the door around lunchtime. I opened it to find a woman my age holding a plate covered in foil. "I'm Nora," she said, her smile reaching all the way to her eyes. "I live down the hall. They told me you moved in today, so I thought I'd bring you something warm." I took the plate, feeling the heat soak into my palms. "Thank you," I managed. "Welcome home," she said simply. After she left, I sat down at the little table by the window. For a long moment, I just listened to the quiet. No accusations, no pity, just the hum of my own breath and the knowledge that this silence was finally mine. I looked at Jake's photo again, at the words I'd taped beneath it. "I'm still here." And for the first time since he'd died, I believed it. 2 weeks passed in a kind of quiet I hadn't known I was missing. Mornings began with coffee in the courtyard, the soft chatter of women who had already decided they liked me. Afternoons drifted by in the little library, where I read whatever I wanted without worrying if someone would roll their eyes at my choices. Evenings ended with the hush of my own breathing in a room that felt more like home every day. No one called me a burden, no one sighed when I spoke, and not once did anyone make me feel like loving me was an obligation. I thought maybe Emma and Kyle would let it go, that they'd decided it was easier to pretend I'd vanished. Part of me expected that. Part of me was even relieved by it. But on a Tuesday morning, I opened my email out of habit and saw her name in bold letters at the top of my inbox. Subject line, "Please just one call." I sat back in my chair, my hand hovering over the mouse. I knew I could delete it without reading a word, but something in me wanted to see if she would finally say what she should have said the day they walked away. I clicked it open. "Mom, I don't even know how to start this. We got the letter from Mr. Dawson. I can't believe you really took us out of everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. I know you're angry, but this feels like too much. Kyle says you're overreacting, but I don't think so anymore. I think you're hurt. And I'm sorry if we made you feel like you weren't part of the family. But please, just call me. One call, we can figure it out. The kids keep asking where you are. They miss you. I miss you. Don't shut us out forever. Please." Emma. I read it twice, waiting for my heart to do something, break, soften, ache. But nothing came. The words felt thin, like she'd poured them through a filter to catch anything too real. There were no apologies for the airport, no admission that she'd planned it all, just regret that her safety net had been cut away. I thought about how many times I'd tried to talk to her over the years to tell her I felt invisible, that I needed her to see me as more than someone to be managed. And every time she'd brushed it aside, too busy, too tired, too sure I'd never leave. I moved the cursor to the trash icon and hovered there for a moment. If she'd written this 2 months ago before the funeral, I would have clung to it. I would have called her back, swallowed my pride, told myself any connection was better than none. But now, after everything I knew the truth, I didn't owe her my forgiveness, just because she'd finally realized what she'd lost. My finger pressed down, and the message disappeared. I closed the laptop and set it on the table. For a moment, I just sat there, feeling the weight of the finality settle around me like a warm blanket. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for her to come back with the right words. I was simply done. Outside, someone laughed, a bright, unguarded sound. I stood up and walked to the window. Nora was in the courtyard, waving me over to join their card game. I glanced once at the empty inbox, then at the faces of the people who had welcomed me without condition. I chose them. I chose myself. I didn't look back. That evening, I joined the weekly book circle in the community lounge. The room was warm, full of soft lamplight, and the quiet rustle of pages turning. A dozen of us sat in a loose circle of armchairs, the kind with floral cushions and little side tables for teacups. Someone passed me a plate of cookies, and when I thanked her, she just smiled and said, "You belong here." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words until they settled into my chest like an anchor. Belonging. Not because I was convenient, not because someone needed something from me, but simply because I was me. The conversation drifted from the novel we'd finished to stories about first jobs and old family recipes. I listened, soaking in every detail. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. No one here was measuring my worth in what I could give them. At some point, Nora turned to me, her voice gentle but curious. "Eleanor, do you ever regret it?" She didn't need to explain what it meant. We all knew. I thought about the motel room, the cold airport floor, the final click of the delete button on Emma's email. Then I thought about this bright room full of laughter, the note taped to Jake's photo on my windowsill, the way my heart no longer felt like it was fighting to keep beating. I met her eyes and felt something like a smile rising from the deepest part of me. "No," I said simply. "I only wish I'd done it sooner." The words surprised me with how true they were. I didn't miss the old house. I didn't miss the strained conversations and the fear of saying the wrong thing. What I missed was the woman I'd been before I started shrinking to fit everyone else's expectations. And here at Riverside Haven, I'd found her again. Someone laughed at a joke I hadn't heard, and the sound pulled me back to the moment. I looked around at these faces, some lined with age, some bright with the same kind of relief I felt, and I knew I'd finally chosen the right kind of family. As the evening drew to a close, I helped gather the books and straighten the chairs. When I reached for my cane, Nora placed a hand lightly on my arm. "You look lighter," she said. I nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the lamps overhead. "I am." When I stepped back, I took in the room one more time. The golden light, the quiet voices, the sense that I was no longer an afterthought. If Emma ever asked again why I walked away, I'd tell her the truth. I didn't leave because I stopped loving them. I left because I finally loved myself enough to stop settling for less. And as I took my seat again, laughter rising around me, I felt something close to peace. I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when it means letting go of the people you thought would stand by you forever. Respect isn't something you owe to someone just because they share your blood. It's something that must be earned again and again through love and decency. I spent too many years believing that loyalty meant tolerating neglect, but I know better now. You are never too old to reclaim your dignity or start fresh. You deserve a life where you are seen, valued, and welcomed simply for who you are, not for what you can give. If you're feeling overlooked or taken for granted, I hope you'll remember this. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally decided to stop settling. I'd love to hear if you've ever had to make a choice like this or stand up for your own worth. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another moment of truth and inspiration.